Developers keep asking me which model to choose, so I built a benchmark suite and through Gemini 3 Pro, Opus 4.5, and Codex 5.1 Max at a real development front-end, back-end, and planning tasks. Here are the results. Hello, I'm Jeremy Groh, founder of Metadata Fusion. In this video, I'm walking you through my Metadata Fusion benchmark suite results for Gemini 3 Pro, Opus 4.5, and Codex 5.1 Max, so you can see where each model earns a place in your development stack. Gemini 3 Pro launched November 18, 2025, caught some people off guard. I don't consider myself one of those, as I expect that Google is a long-term player in this game, and they are really behind the scenes building a large suite. So yes, it did launch, and it was quite significant. But I think what's more notable is how quickly the competitors responded. So Codex 5.1 Codex Max comes right behind it on the 19th. And what's even more significant, Anthropic seems that they were just sitting back holding Opus 4.5. I believe that they were actually just waiting. I believe they had this model already developed and were just waiting for the right moment to respond. Because quickly they responded with another powerful model, which is their previous flagship, which was basically pretty much discontinued the previous version of Opus. But 4.5 definitely came out, and it's definitely a rival to Gemini 3 Pro, equal or outperforms it in many categories. And we're going to walk through those comparisons. But one thing to note is that a lot of these providers, they're playing a different game. They have things in reserve, and they're playing a game of economics. I think it's very notable that one day later, GPT 5.1 Codex Max launches, and then a few days later, Opus 4.5 on the 24th. I believe that Anthropic had this model in reserve, was actually waiting for real competition. And this is a good example. Without competition, these providers will actually hold back their best. And they probably have other things that they're holding back as well. As Opus 4.5 is definitely a very powerful model. And it'll be interesting to study the results in my benchmark suite. But one thing I think that's very notable that we should understand, this is also a game of economics. They are definitely not always putting their best foot forward, and they can turn these things up or down at will. So on to the pricing. Gemini 3 Pro, $2 per input tokens and $12 per output tokens, as compared to OpenAI and Anthropic. So you can see OpenAI is a little bit cheaper on the input tokens and the output tokens. But let's see with the benchmark results if that's worth it. If the output is no good, the price doesn't matter. Because developers such as myself, I don't have a problem paying more if I'm getting a really good output. But for developers like myself, I will pay more. I want to use the best models, but I don't like to waste my money. So I will look at the best model for the best use case. So, and if you look at the price of Opus 4.5, significantly more than all the other models, more than double the cost of Gemini 3 Pro. Is the output worth it? Let's examine that closer in my benchmark suite. So this is the benchmark suite, and we have different categories. We have vision, reasoning, math, and text, and then we have subcategories for these as well. We basically have domain and use case. So we have a reference guide that's available. And you can access these things on metadatafusion.com under the resources section, under the benchmark suite. You can have a full explanation of these. Okay. We have visual, reasoning, mathematical, etc. And if you'll click into one of these, it'll give you an explanation of the test, what it's relevant for, back end, front end, the key metrics, etc. So hopefully this is useful for some of you. On my website, you're going to have an interface, something like this, very close to this, where you'll have provider analytics, where you'll get the rankings and a column chart, where you can click into it and you can get detailed test information. Depending on how you like to view your data, you got it horizontal if you like that. Then we got the domain profiles, visual, reasoning, math, and textual. And you can click into each one of these and get a detailed breakdown. Then you also have the use comparison. So whether you need front end, back end, planning, reasoning, or content. So you'll have these different categories that can be helpful for you deciding which to choose. And I will be continuing to update this with some other providers. I think I'll probably add 3 to 5 more providers here in the coming weeks, and that'll be available at metadatafusion.com under the resources, the benchmark suite section. And then you also have the leaderboard, which will be something like this. I actually going to aggregate it to different, I have different ways that I can output this, but you'll have a leaderboard there as well. And of course, at the end of each one of these interactions, you'll have this, and it'll be fully interactive. So that's available at metadatafusion.com under the resources section, and you'll go to the benchmark suite. So let's go and start looking at some of the results. So as we noted, we have quite a few tests. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but we're going to go through some notable ones. So the Flying Dragon simulation. This is an interesting test. I know other people do this type of benchmark as well. But one thing to note about every one of these tests, the instructions on the prompts are to render this in 1920 by 1080. So if the model is not following those instructions, it's going to have points deducted for that. So in this specific test, Gemini scored the highest. None of them did well, to be honest. But Gemini was the winner on this one. And let's look at their output. All right, let's just expand it. I have different ways to view that. So it did do okay, but there's not that many controls. Okay, and I always get the stall warning. And this was actually the winner. So I would have hoped for more. But we'll run some new updated tests. But as you can see, the score, it only scored 62.5 out of 100. So I wish it could have done better, but no, it did not do as well as expected. Let's give a look at Codex's output, which was last place. So this was the worst one. It scaled this completely wrong. So the controls are way here off the screen. And no matter what you do, you can barely see even the creature. It did quite poorly. So it got 34.5 out of 100. It did not do well. So very disappointing result from this one. So Opus 4.5 did a little bit better, but this is still quite poor. As you can see, the dragon is quite odd looking. You don't even really see wings. It will breathe fire, I believe. But the controls are very non-responsive. The camera output doesn't work. Now keep in mind, this is a one prompt test. So I will do some agentic tests with strict criterion, maybe the files that can be allotted, etc. But it did not follow the instructions, and it scored the worst. So Gemini 3 Pro was the winner. Opus 4.5 only got 51.5 out of 100 on this one. So for the next test, we're doing the Angry Birds simulation, which I know a lot of other people have done this test. And once again, on this task, Gemini 3 Pro was the clear winner. So the interesting thing about this, however, it did get 82. It's actually playing soccer instead of actual Angry Birds. So if you look at the output, when you pull this back, it's kicking this thing like a soccer ball. I mean, I guess if I would have told it to do this would have been nice, maybe. But this is not actually what it's intended to do. But it actually does function. It actually does function, but it missed the mark a little bit. So let's have a look at Codex 5.1 Max. So Codex 5.1 Max definitely missed the mark quite heavily. The aspect ratio is way off. You'll see here, and it's quite poor. It doesn't work at all. So you can see the arc is always the same, and it barely does that. So it did not do very well at all. But so that's Codex 5.1 Max. So here's Opus 4.5. The design looks, okay and pleasant, but this also does not actually work. The arc and everything is correct, but when you open it up, it's automatically completing. So there's definitely some errors in this. Now I'm sure with a couple prompts, this could be, fine-tuned. But it definitely was only able to get second place because of this. So it's got some issues. So that's the scores that it's got on this one. So now we're going to the Sonic style game that we have. And the winner on this was Opus 4.5. A clear winner on this one. And actually, it looks like GPT 5.1 Codex came in second, and Gemini is bringing up the rear on this one. So here is the worst score, but even this one works. You have to do some fiddling with it, but even this one works a little bit. But sometimes the jumping function is the controls are not 100% responsive, but it does a little bit. So there's the scores for Gemini 3 Pro. Okay, here's the Codex 5.1 Max. The design's not quite as good, but it's actually working, which is one of the things that's most important. The jump feature works, and you can actually get up here and do a few things. But it's still a long way from what we would want. But it is working, as you can see. So this one is actually quite good. This is actually fully functional. This game is actually fully functional. So the clear winner was definitely Opus 4.5, and this one actually works. You can jump, you can spin. This one's fully functional, a fully functional game. So the clear winner on this, one prompt, it followed all the instructions. It's got a real game with real levels. Clearly knocked it out the park on this one. So it got 93.5 for Opus on this one. It did a pretty fine job on this one. You can look at even at the scaled approach. Yeah, it did a good job. So now let's look at the chess. And you can get a detailed understanding of the metrics and what they're testing for on my website, MediaDataFusion.com. Under the resources section, you can go to the benchmark suite. I have guides there as well that are free, absolutely free of charge, that explain these tests and what we're testing for, whether it's visual, math, reasoning, front end, back end, planning, etc. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so here's the test, and it's actually not functional for this one. It's got this weird thing going on here. If I go to versus CPU, I can't actually move the chess pieces. So obviously that's some serious point deduction for that. Let's see if it'll do the autoplay. So it will do the autoplay, which is good. So it didn't get 0, but it's far from working. It's basically like the autoplay is the only way that's going to work. So let's look at the second place holder, Codex 5.1 Max. So this is a functional chess game, but it did not get this scaling correct because all these have strict instructions to do 1920 by 1080. So I would actually have to back this down to see the chessboard correctly, which I can do. And all the controls do work, which is good. But it's not functioning as it should. But let's see if we can play. So let's do a novice. Let's see if we can move here. So it is working. The pieces don't look quite right. So I got my rook, my knight. Okay. So it works. It's functional. The pieces don't have very good definition. And the scaling was not correct. But it still gained 81 out of 100. Keep in mind, this is, this could be cleaned up, but not too horrible of a result. So let's go on to the clear winner of the chess, which was Opus 4.5. So the chessboard is definitely clearly visible. It's scaled correctly. Also in these prompts, they have strict instructions that any menu it puts must be collapsible. So it followed the instructions. It's done what it's supposed to do. So those are one of the test metrics that's very important. I have a capture mode that I can put it into if I need to scale these down. So it has these strict metrics, and it followed all the instructions. So I can clearly remove all that. and I can do all the moves I need to. We can spin this thing. We can do what we need to do. Yeah. And the chess pieces look correct. And it's got the move history. I can go back to my menu. So this is fully functional in one shot. So it did a pretty good job. Clear winner, Opus 4.5. So the next test we're going to look at is the 3D Chronometer. And the winner on this one looks like Gemini 3 Pro just edged out Opus 4.5 on this one. You know, SVG is not something that every model can even handle. So let's give a look at it. So none of them, you know, did everything that they're supposed to do on this one. It did include the zoom option, which was supposed to be there, but these gears are not even moving, all of them. And they're not meshed together. So it was a start, but it's got some work to do for Gemini 3 Pro. And this is what Codex 5.1 Max did. Definitely extremely poor. You can't even barely even see any gears. Let's zoom in on them. Maybe they make them really, really fine, but they're not too great. But if you really zoom in on it, you can see them. But the scaling is not the best in the world. But very basic and quite missing the mark on that. And Opus 4.5, which basically this one and Gemini were neck and neck. It's not scaled correctly. If you were to shrink the screen down, you can see this and the controls, but it's not scaled like it should be. But it did an okay job, and it has some different controls. But 75 points for Opus 4.5. So now we're on to the Hypercube Tesseract, and this is testing WebGL. So looks like Gemini 3 Pro is the big loser on this one with Opus 4.5 at 90%. Let's look at the output for Gemini 3 Pro. It's null. It basically doesn't work. So let's go on to Codex 5.1 Max. So it does render. However, it failed on the scaling. It's supposed to be 1920 by 80. You'll see I have to zoom way out to access any of the controls. However, it is somewhat functional. It does some of the things that we wanted to do. We can take out the auto rotate. We can scale it. It's got some features. It's definitely a little bit lacking, but it works. So let's check the output for Opus 4.5. And you can see it's running smoothly. The aspect ratio is correct, and we have a clean menu. So this is definitely reflect in the score, why it received the score it did. You can do the panels, the pane. This is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And you can adjust the speed, the distance, the 3D distance, the edge width. All the controls are working on this one. So that is the leaderboard. Now let's go on to the L ecosystem. Okay. So as with all the prompts, they're supposed to be 1920 by 1080. This one's going to be an ecosystem of trees. Looks like the leader on this one was Gemini 3 Pro at 82 points. And bringing up the rear be Codex 5.1 Max with Opus in second. Let's check the output. We'll expand it. So you can see this is scaled correctly, 1920 by 1080. And you can, let's see the season progress. Okay. So it'll tell us up here on the left, spring. Okay. That's part of the instructions. Summer. Autumn. Let's see if we can increase the wind strength. Okay. Well, I broke them down. Let's see if it'll increase the trees. I think it's regenerated a little bit. Okay, and then the tree density. So it is working, and we can go all the way to winter, etc. So nothing spectacular. It definitely could have done better, but it is working. Thus, that reflects in its score of 82 points out of 100. That's Gemini 3 Pro. And Codex 5.1 Max, it failed. No need to even pull that one up. Let's look at Opus 4.5. So it did fail a little bit on the scaling. However, it is functioning. So to access the menu, I'm going to need to scale out. So this is one of the things what it struggled with. So we can change the type of the tree: oak, willow, birch, spring, autumn, winter, cycle the speed, iterations. So it is technically functional, but it missed on quite a few different points. There's the wind strength, turbulence, wind direction, etc. And we can regenerate them all. But it missed on quite a few points, thus that reflects in its score. The next tab, so we're going to do the SDF Fractal World. And it looks like the clear winner on this is Opus 4.5 with the Gemini 3 Pro and Codex 5.1 at 37 each. Let's see their output, which they both failed. As you can see, these are not working. Let's go check Codex 5.1 Max, which I believe also failed. Yeah, even less here, even if you scale out. It's got some controls, but they're doing nothing. So here's Opus 4.5. Let's check the output. So this rendered directly, and this is actually not a simple task for many LLMs. So we can choose between the different ones. The 3D set. We can check the power, see if that'll work. We can adjust the iterations. As you can see it adjusting. Let's see if we can change the colors. Fully customizable and working as should. Fog density. You can adjust the colors. So that reflects in its score of 91 points out of 100 for Opus 4.5. Now let's go on to the Galaxy Network Interactive. And if you're interested in seeing these provider analytics results, the charts and the leaderboards, you can go to MediaDataFusion.com under the resources on the benchmark suite. I also have guides available, and there's an interactive guide where you can check these results. And I will be updating these with more models here soon. So, looks like Gemini did well on this at 90 points. And it's working as should. When I click on here, let's get the control deck out. So when I click on here, it's supposed to give me that information. And it does. So nothing fancy. It didn't exceed the criterion, but it did what it's supposed to do. Let's check Codex 5.1 Max. So Codex 5.1 Max has got a score of 78. As usual, it struggles with the scaling. So I'm probably going to have to zoom way out to see the controls. And if you see, I had to scroll way out because it did not respect the 19 by 20 aspect ratio. But it's technically working. But this reflects in the score. Let's check Opus 4.5. So here's Opus 4.5. So you'll notice right away the aspect ratio is correct. And it's just running smoother and more accurately. It's definitely more polished. If I click on here, I'm going to have all the information from that celestial body. I can do the repulsion force. I can zoom in. I can zoom out. This is working phenomenally. It did a very good job. The user interface is great. I mean, I can even control the link distance. This one's working really well. So that reflects in score. There were a few requirements that it didn't follow exactly. So this is why it did not get 100 points. But it did well. Now let's go to the Minecraft style 2D builder. So looks like the winner on this one is going to be Gemini 3 Pro with Opus 4.5 coming in second. Let's check the rendered output. So this one does work. Of course, it could be better. So it is functional, nothing spectacular, but it did fulfill some of the requirements. Let's check Codex 5.1 max. So this is completely non-functional. It just drops down, but it did meet some of the coding requirements, thus that reflected in its score. But as the game, it's pretty much unusable. Let's check Opus 4.5. So here's Opus 4.5. You'll see it's not scaled correctly. So this obviously reflects in score, but it was slightly usable, but definitely not a pleasant user interface. So you can't jump. And within a few prompts, it's possible to get this one working, but definitely did not follow very well. So that reflects in a score of 65 because it did not get a working application. So now we're going to go on to the Swarm Pathfinder. The winner on this one is going to be Gemini 3 Pro, followed by Opus 4.5. Let's check the output. So you'll notice straight away the aspect ratio is correct and it's fully functional. I would say Gemini did a pretty good job on this one. All the controls are working. The alignment, I can generate the maze, and it will follow that maze. And I can respawn the agents to start all over again. I can add walls. I can add the trail decay. Fully functional and running smoothly, and it reflected in score. Let's check Codex 5.1 max. So Codex 5.1 max, I noticed straight away, aspect ratio is off. So I'm going to have to zoom out to bring in the controls. So definitely losing points for this. Plus, it doesn't have much function. I could maybe draw, let's see if it'll even do anything. Yeah, it's barely functional. But it did receive some points because it got some of the coding elements correct. Let's go check Opus 4.5. Okay, Opus 4.5. So Opus 4.5 did fail on the aspect ratio, thus it did receive a lower score. However, it is working. But I will say this one is resource intensive. Not as smooth as Gemini's, but it is functional. But the aspect ratio is not correct. But I can add the maze. It does have a lot of the elements that are requested, but failed on a few other points and definitely not running as smooth as Gemini 3 Pro. So the next test we're going to do the true orbital mechanics simulation. Looks like the winner here is Opus 4.5 with Gemini 3 Pro right behind it. Let's check the output. Okay, aspect ratio is correct. The orbit's correct. Let's zoom out and see if we have the other celestial bodies. Yeah, we got Jupiter there. We've got a description. We've got our zoom controls, which is a part of the requirement. We can speed up the time days. Okay. It's meeting these requirements, thus that reflects in the score. Let's check Codex 5.1 max. So this is definitely, the aspect ratio is definitely pretty wonky on this. And the UI is a little odd. But it does function slightly. But it's definitely not the best. So I would say it's like halfway functioning. This would take several iterations to get this going. Let's check Opus 4.5. So Opus 4.5, the winner. On this one, as you can see, we go on here, the aspect ratio is spot on. And it's running smoothly. We got the trails, no trails. Follow the selected. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. It's following all the requested requirements. So the winner on that one. Do the holographic city, data viz. Looks like the clear winner was Opus 4.5. Let's check Gemini. Gemini is null. Let's check Codex 5.1 max. Right away, you can see the aspect ratio is off, and it's basically just jumping up and down. And I have to go zoom way out to receive any controls. And it's not very functional. If I click on here, I don't have easy access to the data that it's supposed to represent. So not a pleasant experience there. Let's go to Opus 4.5. So you can scroll around on here. You can pan in, you can zoom, you can click, but it still runs a little rough. And you can see the buildings are kind of like half cutouts. So the score is obviously limited for that. You can control the building density, the height scale. So that reflects in its score. So definitely could be better, but it was the winner in this category. So the next test is the Minecraft style voxel world. So this one's going to be the 3D version of the test. And if you're interested in getting more of how these tests are scored, you can get them at my website, MediaDataFusion.com, under resources. The benchmark suite, now also have guides there available. I will have a provider analytics interactive chart that you can access. And at the bottom of each one of these, you'll have also the description on the different tests and what we're testing, the key metrics, what they're suited for, whether it be front end, back end, planning, etc. And all these categories are well defined on there. So it might help you in your development workflow. Okay, this one is technically functional. Could be better, of course. I can jump. But pretty basic. I think the aspect ratio is a little bit off on this one as well. No, the aspect ratio is good. Yeah, it's just telling me I died and I couldn't even see it coming at me. So that reflects in the score. A couple iterations that could have been improved, but this test is a one prompt test. Okay. So Codex 5.1 max, it got the world, but this is completely non-functional. So it got some points for fulfilling some coding requirements, but this is unusable. Controls are null. Let's check the winner, Opus 4.5. And you have a full interactive experience, and it works. So I can go, I can jump, I can get around. I wish the full motion was working. But it definitely beat out the other models for sure. Okay, so 89 points out of 100 for Opus 4.5, and that reflects in its score. It did a fairly decent job there. So now we're coming to the reasoning category. So this is the advanced logic puzzle solver. Okay, looks like the winner here was Opus 4.5 and Gemini coming in second. So this one does work. The aspect ratio is there, and it will generate the puzzles. We can visualize the solution. However, the visualized solution is definitely lacking. It's also lacking in some coding requirements that are part of the testing scores. But it is technically functional. So the UI is definitely leaves a lot to be desired. It's a little clunky, but it technically works. But it's not very useful. It missed definitely some of the requirements, and that reflects in its score. All right, so here's a much cleaner UI, and it's actually quite a bit more functional. We can do the Einstein riddle, we can do the constraint satisfaction, the proposal logic, we can ask for clues, we can do forward checking, we can ask for get hint, and let's generate new. And clearly, they have everything we need, and we can do the auto solve. We can do step through. Very functional, well laid out. There's quite a few requirements that it hit, and that reflects in its score. So this actually took a lot of reasoning logic to get to that conclusion. So The clear winner, Opus 4.5 on this one. The next reasoning test we're going to do is the multi-hop synthetic knowledge. Okay, this is basically a questioning reasoning, and the answer is beta logistics. And they all fulfill the requirements on this. This one, I think I will make it a little bit harder, since all the models were able to solve this one. So we'll go on to the next test, since they all scored the same and they all passed. The next reasoning one is the real-time strategy game. It looks like Gemini 3 Pro just edged out Opus on this one. Okay, you'll notice right away that it has the aspect ratio correct, which I don't believe any of the other models were able to achieve that. So this is a real, like RTS strategy game, and it actually executed it. It did a good job. So, and it works. So that reflects in its score. It actually works. It's got the whole grid, and this one actually works. Which, as usual, the aspect ratio is way off. So we're going to zoom way out and see if we got any output here. So output is null for Codex 5.1 max. Even if we zoom out and access all the controls, that reflects in its score. So Opus 4.5, it did fulfill quite a few of the requirements, but the aspect ratio is off, so we're going to need to zoom out to get to the mini map. But it is technically functional, and you can actually play the game. And the next test, the traveling salesman problem, we're on to the math category. And it looks like Gemini 3 Pro is the winner here with Opus 4.5 in second. Now let's increase the city, generate new cities. Problem size, we'll start the simulation. Okay, so we have our graph. Requirements are being met. So it's doing quite well. Yeah. So that's Gemini 3 Pro. So here's Codex 5.1 max. As usual, I have to zoom way out to access the controls, but technically it will work. We can increase the population size. We can start, we can pause, we can generate the cities. Let's see if we can. Pretty minimal. So that reflects in its score. Aspect ratio is a little off. So it looks like we're going to need to zoom out. Yeah. Well, let's see if it works. So we're going to put our cities up. We're going to generate our cities. Let's run it. So it is working. We can increase population size. There's temperature. And we can run them all. So that's Opus 4.5. Technically working. Missed it in a few aspects, and that hurt its score. But it is actually functional. 88.5 for Opus 4.5. Let's go on to the next test. So now we're on to the second math problems, the Enigma machine Cipher. As you can see from the expected output, it's supposed to deliver a fully functional Enigma M3 machine with historically accurate rotor wirings. You can see that there. Let's check the output. So Gemini 3 Pro did pretty good on this, 87.5 out of 100. And it will run a simulation. And I believe some marker. I'm going to need to go to capture mode to access these controls. I have a capture mode on here so I can access things that may be covered. Let's load historical data. So not too bad. So it looks like the aspect ratio for Codex 5.1 max is a little bit off like usual. And it shows in the UI. And this is not fully functional because it's supposed to include a sample and it's not. Yeah, sample's not working. So that's Codex 5.1 Max. Another functional with the aspect ratio a little bit off. So we have to zoom out to access that. But technically it's actually somewhat similar to Gemini 3 Pro. This design, but the aspect ratio is off. Some of that was heavily the difference in the scores for these two. All right, let's go on to the next test. So the next test is a contest level word problem. And it looks like they all scored the same. They all got the answer right, which is 4. I'll show you Gemini 3 Pro. They're supposed to output the full logic, which they did, and the final answer is 4. They all got it correct. I think I will make this one a little bit more difficult for the next round of testing, since all models solved it. I think every model on here, every test I have on here where all models got it the same and right, then I will be upgrading those. Okay, so let's go on to the next test. The number theory problem. And it looks like Gemini 3 Pro and Codex 5.1 got it right, but Opus 4.5 failed because the expected output is supposed to be 992. Let's see the rendered output. 992. Codex got the same. However, here's the output for Opus 4.5. It thought a little too long and then suffered from context rot, and its final answer was 89012. So it failed that. All right, let's go on to the next test. Text category, Advanced Text Analysis Engine. And it looked like Gemini 3 Pro is the winner on this one. Okay, it's got sample data as requested. It's got a compare docs. It's got the density. Nothing spectacular, but it's followed instructions, as all of these prompts have instructions to have toggle commands to get rid of the menu if we need to. So let's check Codex 5.1 Max. So as usual with Codex 5.1, the aspect ratio is off. And it looks like it tried to just put an image out here because it's like stretching them, you can see. So that reflects in its score, although it did fulfill some of the requirements. But quite a wonky layout and could use some upgrades. All right, let's check Opus 4.5. And here's Opus 4.5. A little bit better layout. Looks like it's respected the aspect ratio. Top account. Analyze the text. Let's see if it's got the sample data. I don't see it's got sample data, so we'll just add some data to it. All right, it analyzed the data. So it's functioning as it should. Didn't follow some of the requirements. It's supposed to have sample data, etc. So let's go on to the last test. And the last test is a syntax stress tester. And it looks like this was a tough test for all the models. Looks like Opus barely beat them out, but they all failed this test. Let's look at the output for Gemini. It doesn't work. I could put data in here and it's going to fail. It's null, complete fail. Codex 5.1, let's go check that one. And it's just quite ridiculous. Aspect ratio, not there. It's way, way off. So unusable. Let's check Opus 4.5. The winner, if you can call it that, but it did beat out the other two models. Let's put in some data and see if it'll do anything with that data. Okay. Let's see if it'll run it. Run benchmark, stress test, nothing. So it really got more points basically for a better design, but it's still not functioning. It's not stress testing, it's not running the benchmark. Not at all. So that concludes all the tests that we went through. I went through quite a few of them. I didn't cover all of them as there's quite a few. But if you want to go and you want to see the platform results on my website, metadatafusion.com, under the resources section in the benchmark suite, and I also have guides that are available, absolutely free. You'll have a provider analytics. These are fully interactive charts. And if you want to see ranking vertical, horizontal, here's like the overall leaderboard. You can click in there and see the test scores, which are color coded according to their scores. You can get a ranking vertical, horizontal, and we have domain profiles charts. You can click on those, you can get the details. Okay, if you want to get the data on that. The use comparison, whether it's front end, back end, planning, reasoning, or content. You can click on a given provider and you can get the scores, etc. And I will be continuing to build on to this Metadata Fusion benchmark suite. I'll be adding more models in the coming weeks and quite a bit more tests and updating it. Because you can check this out, metadatafusion.com, under the resource section guides. There'll be the provider analytics. And you also have below that on the provider analytics and the leaderboard, that's on my website, you also have the benchmark reference guide. So you'll be able to understand the test, what they're testing for, and what those test results are going to mean for your dev work. Okay? So you'll also have the metric comparison, the different metrics that we're scoring, and then you'll have the trends over time, etc. Okay? And it'll function very similar to this. This is my internal tool, but I have a scaled down version that is on my website that'll be available for you. And here's the leaderboard. And you'll have this. Basically, I have a different version. I will have yours scaled off. I'll have visual, reasoning, math on that. And you'll basically have an interactive chart that's going to give you an overview of all the test scores. You'll get an overview of the overall scores on the leaderboard. And then you'll have individual score tests. And then you'll have the category tests on the leaderboard. So you'll have two ways to view the data on the leaderboard. In conclusion, Opus 4.5 just edges out Gemini 3 Pro in the overall scores. However, Gemini 3 Pro is easily the best value for the money. Codex 5.1 Max is more of a planner than a coder. If you want a deep dive into the leaderboard, scores, and the provider analytics, go to my website, metadatafusion.com, under the resources section, benchmark suite, and I also have free guides available. That's it for me. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you in the next one.